Imagine, for one moment, that you, yes, you, were a set designer at Wizards of the Coast. Now imagine that your voice actually mattered. Would you, or would you not, allow the card Teferi, Time Reveler, to be printed? What about Oko, Thief of Crowns? I thought not. You see, R&D cannot be trusted to consistently produce cards that don't snap formats in half like a baseball bat across Bo Jackson's thigh. This is why you must strive in your own created universes of Cube to keep the balance. You must maintain the balance. Today, we show how you can apply the principles of a value rating system and mathematics to derive formulas for the computation of card power levels. If that was too many big words, sit tight and let us explain. All that and more, you're listening to the CardMisers podcast.
Welcome back. Today we're feverish to begin part 2 of the Cube Building Deep Dive series, where we provide you with the tools you need to properly evaluate cards and create the perfect limited environment for the world to enjoy. Today, as we mentioned, we're specifically focusing on the selection process for getting the right cards for the cube through a mixture of box checking and formulas. There's no reason to wait, so let's jump on in.
First, I want to quickly reiterate what was said last episode, and much of our advice has come from our own brains, but as brains are sponges for information, it is very possible that many of these things that we discuss have been thought and said before.
Exactly. Therefore, we will do our best to give credit where credit is due for any information that we glean from other sources, but assume the best intentions on our parts. Please. Thank you.
Right. Now, I think we should start with a general outline of how this episode is going to play out.
Righto. So we have the overview of card selection, where we will be discussing the process of choosing cards and what to look for. Also, in this section, we will let you guys know how using tools like Gatherer can help very greatly at that, and as well as keeping track of how many strategies a card can help.
Right, and all these things you want to keep in mind, and all these things we will talk about in order to help while you're choosing your cards. Next, we have an in-depth guide to the formulas that we created or that we got from other places for Magic cards and how you can apply these formulas to compare the relative power levels of these cards.
The next thing we'll go over for you guys is a walkthrough for the spreadsheet and how it works and how you can use it.
Right, so we have made a spreadsheet for you guys that will help you in your cube construction. We'll talk about that a little bit later, so sit tight if you like things being given to you for free, because that is certainly something. And next we have the application of a formula example to demonstrate how it's used. So we're just going to be talking about some examples about how you use these formulas so that you understand the best ways, and also some fringe examples about, certain kinds of cards and how to deal with them when you find them.
And that's basically it. We're delivering to you today only the tools and guidance you need to make your card selections. There's not too much to talk about simply because we aren't choosing the cards for you, but yeah.
Right, it turns out that this process is by far the longest part of making a cube, but there isn't much for us to discuss since finding the cards is up to you in what it is that you want for your cube. We just give you the structure.
Just not the substance.
Amen.
Praise Jesus.
Give unto the Lord your God.
Peace be with you.
And also with you.
Let us celebrate peace unto all.
What are we doing right now?
I'm not sure. It just felt right, like one of those times in church.
All right, let's begin by discussing the card selection and what you're going to want to be doing when picking the precise cards that you want.
Right. Wizards has printed so many freaking cards over the course of the last 30 years or so.
Exactly. So there is almost always a card that will fit perfectly into your slot in your cube.
Right. Include some satisfying fit images or GIFs right here. Treat your cube and the cards you want to include as a puzzle, not a compendium.
I like this idea. You see, the pieces of your cube are specific and meant to support particular strategies with particular effects. This means that the best version of an effect is not necessarily the one that you should choose.
Amen to that, which, this is something we've said a million times, but it's important and is worth repeating multiple times.
Exactly. So we advise that whichever card you choose for a particular slot, you make sure it ticks off as many boxes as possible.
And by boxes, we mean categories of support for archetypes in your cube. This is done by essentially creating a list of the archetypes you're supporting in your cube per color combination and deciding which version of an effect can support as many of these as possible.
Right. Now, a stellar example of this is a card like Muldrifter, which can support a blue-white flyer strategy, a mono-blue card draw strategy, or even like an Esper Blink strategy. It synergizes with everything from Ephemerate to Favorable Winds to Chasm Skulker. It's just a great card that checks the boxes of so many different strategies.
A card that we included in our commander cube because of its versatility was Tezzeret's Gambit. And this card is basically just a 4-mana divination, 3 mana if you pay 2 life, and it draws you 2 cards. But the important part is that it proliferates as well.
Right. What makes this card amazing is that it's super easy to cast. 3 generic mana almost every time, so that any deck from 1 to 5 colors can cast it no sweat. So it helps facilitate a multicolored strategy that may need to draw a few extra cards to find the right lands. Also, it proliferates. And this supports the counter strategy that commanders like Atraxa are trying to pull off. It generally supports Planeswalkers also, and especially walkers you can play as your commander, like Saheeli the Gifted. And finally, it fits with blue card draw, which uses cards like Shabraz, the Sky Shark, or Chasm Skulker, or Toothy Imaginary Friend to create big threats, then to proliferate onto as well. So it checks like 4 or 5 support boxes for important things, all in just one card. Compared to something like Divination or Glimmer of Genius, 2 good card draw spells, which do like less than 3/4 of what Gambit does in this particular cube.
That is an excellent example and illustrates the point perfectly. You need to find the right card that supports as many things as possible.
So create that list of support that your cards need to follow, and then go through one by one, looking at the effects that you want and see which versions cover the broadest base. So what I mean by this is like, let's say you need a card draw effect in blue, like we were talking about with Tezzeret's Gambit. You have your list of archetypes that you're playing in your cube, and you check off mentally, which ones that card supports, and then whichever of the card draw effects that you're looking for supports the most is probably the one that you want to include.
Couldn't have said that better. Now, let's pivot to the actual equations that you can use once you've found your cards and explain how those work.
Right, so let's real quick discuss what you're doing with these equations, and first off, where we got their inspiration. So I was trolling through Google trying to find someone who is much smarter than me and had come up with an equation for determining the power level of a card of Magic, and it turns out that someone did. I will leave the link to them and their original formula below, which is the entire basis for all of the mathematics that we will be sharing, so credits to them.
Yeah, I believe the user that you found was Green D Zen. I think I'm saying that right. Hopefully, thank you, guy. He posted his formula in 2014, and this was on the MTG Salvation website, I may add.
Now, what you have to know is that this formula spits out a number value for a card. This number means literally nothing until compared to another number of another card. So let's say that Snapcaster Mage gets a number of 5, and Narcomoeba gets a number of 2, and most commons and uncommons are, below 2. This tells us that Snapcaster Mage is a really powerful card, and Narcomoeba is very good for an uncommon. But those numbers just generically, if you were to show up at your FNM with your modern deck that plays 5 Snapcasters and told someone, yeah, Snapcaster's worth a 5, that means literally nothing.
Well, if you show up to your modern night playing 5 Snapcasters, something's
already
off.
I said 4 Snapcasters, and they said the Snapcasters are a 5.
Yeah. Well, we'll see about that one. But it does not tell you that Narcomoeba is only half as good as Snapcaster Mage, even though the numbers would appear that way. Simply that the raw power output shows Narcomoeba far below Snapcaster Mage.
Right. Magic cards are so varied and useful in particular areas, not to mention complicated as hell, so having a formula that encompasses all of that and gives accurate readouts is either impossible or more complicated than anyone finds worthy of figuring out.
Right, so thus we will be using the crude formulas provided.
Hey, whoa, I came up with these formulas, man. Don't call them crude.
Hey, you got them off MTG Salvation.
Yeah, I know, but I adapted them. Oh, come on, give me some credit.
Did you put some +1/+1 counters on them?
That was pretty funny. All right, so the first thing we have is the equation number 1 for creatures, and we will show an image of it on the board We'll show an image of it on the video for those watching so you can get a better idea. Other than that, we're just going to sort of read it off. So you're going to have in the numerator of a fraction, you're going to have power plus toughness plus small ability plus medium ability plus large ability plus extra large ability minus drawback minus major drawback divided by CMC or converted mana cost.
Right, so let's explain the variable components of this equation. Listen up, though, because these rankings are going to be the same for all card equations, and we refuse to repeat ourselves.
He's right. Listen to the man.
Power and toughness is very obvious.
Right, so it's just going to be whatever's on the creature, add those together, there you go. We don't have to explain anymore. Yeah. Next, with small abilities, these are valued as a +1 and are, really small bonuses, like something that rarely is relevant to the card when played in normal circumstances, like the mill clause on Narcomoeba, which puts on the battlefield when it's milled off the top. That's a +1, doesn't really do much.
Also, another small ability is looting effects that cost 2 or more mana. So on Teferi's Protege, it has a looting effect that costs 3 mana. So that's a small plus. So we give it a +1. Yeah.
Yep. Other +1s are like, just things that you aren't usually going to activate or just give you like tiny advantages. Something like Outlast for like 3 mana on your like 1-drop creature. You're rarely going to use it. So, you don't need it. What's that card called? Like Herald of Anafenza, I think. That Outlast ability is definitely just like a +1.
Oh, right, yeah. If it has text on the card, but it almost might as well not be there, it counts as a +1 for the most part.
Yeah, so things that are, as we said, things that are small, minor, those are +1s. Next, with average abilities, these are assigned a +2 for value.
Yeah, and these are abilities such as Flying, Trample, Vigilance, and other moderate things like that. Stuff that makes a creature good. Evasive abilities count in here too, so Menace, Shadow, etc.
Right, so your +2s are, just a step up from your +1s. If you have something that you're more likely to activate or does more, like on Spectral Sailor, the 4-mana draw card, that's actually a +2 ability, at least I think, because, drawing a card is a lot. Maybe it's like a plus like 1.5, but that's sort of beside the point.
Yeah, especially with that creature being just a 1-mana flash 1/1 creature. The ability on a 1-mana card like that deserves a +2 in my opinion. Yeah. So especially things that give you card draw are should be +2s. Like Baleful Strix entering the battlefield, drawing a card, that should be a +2, etc., etc. If you get a card's worth of value from it, then that's pretty solidly a +2. Right, and especially if creatures have multiple keywords, that's usually a +2, depending on what keyword it is.
Right. All right. I take back what I said about Spectral Sailor. I don't think that 4-mana ability. I think 4 mana is just too much to pay for a card. But if it's like 2 mana for a card, then I think that's a good +2 right there. If you're drawing it, not looting.
That would be some sweet sauce.
Like on like Argyle's Bloodfast, something like that. All right. Anyways, let's move on to big abilities, and these are assigned a value of +3.
Yeah. So these are the abilities like the keywords that say Hexproof, Double Strike, Indestructible, Blink stuff, and Graveyard to hand abilities. Assuming a reasonable mana cost.
Right, so like Durable Coil Bug has a 5-mana return this card from your graveyard to your hand. 5 mana is a little bit too much, but let's say Gutter Bones is only like 2 or 3 mana. I can't really remember, but Gutter Bones, it's very cheap to return it from the graveyard to the hand, and so that's probably a +3 right there, definitely. So most abilities on a playable card, quote-unquote playable card, will fall in this category. Everything from the Blink ability on Eldrazi Displacer to the damage-dealing effects on Eidolon of the Great Revels. These sorts of effects are considered +3s.
Right. If a card is played in Modern, Legacy, or Vintage, odds are it has an ability of a +3 on it. So a good example that we kind of said earlier was the Baleful Strix. It draws you a card, which is pretty much like a +2 ability, right, Travis?
Yeah. I guess maybe it is a +3.
But it also has Flying and Death Touch, so... those abilities
I guess
together.
It is a +2. Yeah, Baleful Strix draw should be a +2,
but with the Flying and Death Touch,
Flying and Death Touch, that's +2. Death Touch is +2, so that's 4 plus, so 6.
Right.
Oh my gosh, guys!
Wow.
Baleful Strix is a 4. Baleful Strix is a 4 on this power level. That's awesome. It totally makes sense though.
Oh yeah,
that card's great.
Another good example that it really hurts my soul, but Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath.
Yeah, that's a good example.
It really should be draw a card or gain 3 life, or choose 2 of the 3 things. Draw a card, gain 3 life, and put a land from your hand on the battlefield. I believe it should be that way, but the way it is right now is like an insane +3 ability.
Oh yeah, that's like if you were to give gradations of +3, like +2.5, +2.7, +3. That's definitely a +3 one right there. You're doing 3 things all in one ETB. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, Uro's like top of the ceiling.
Oh yeah, that's at the top. Yeah, Uro's so good. They really should have banned that card, I think. But other top 3s, other +3s, I would say like a lot of like free sack outlets. So
Viscera?
Yeah, like Viscera, perhaps maybe like a +2.5. Oh, something I really want to bring up here is that you can use gradations like we just said. So if something is better than just a +2 but worse than a +3, you could do a +2.5. It'll actually help you get closer to the actual card power level, especially if it turns out that the card power level is like way too high. Like if we were to give Viserion a +3, it would be a 5 on the scale. I think that the sacrifice ability is only like a +1.5.
I mean, it's a common for a reason, but you can really, if you have the right cards, it can be really, really potent.
Yeah.
So
I think Yahenni's sacrifice ability to give it indestructible, I think that counts as a +3 because you're getting one of the +3
keywords.
value keywords from doing that. So yeah, I think that counts as a +3 and it's free.
Right, the ability alone allows for a free sack outlet and allows Yahenni to become indestructible. So 2 really, really good abilities and 2 abilities that can be abused easily.
Oh yeah. Now we have the extra large abilities, and these are assigned a +5 value.
So these are complex triggered abilities, much of what you see on the Eldrazi Titans. It includes graveyard to the battlefield recursion like Reanimate, and really good activated abilities like Deadeye Navigator for, relatively cheap mana cost.
Oh yeah, Deadeye Navigator is definitely a +5. That blink, because it gives it to either creature, just, oh my goodness.
And the fact that it's only 2 mana is absurd.
Yep.
Even 3 mana, it still would be pretty good. But I mean, the 2 mana really pushes it to the top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then like talking about complex triggered abilities, something like Snapcaster Mage is a +5 ability because you just get to choose any instant sorcery in your graveyard. It can be anything. It's very situational. Not very situational. It's
Versatile.
It's very versatile. Thank you. It's not situational. If it was situational, it'd be bad. I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. But so Snapcaster definitely gets a +5 for that ability, which is why, with its power and toughness of 3 combined plus the 5, as well as Flash, which is a +2. You've got Flash +3 combined power and toughness plus 5. That's 10 divided by the mana cost of 2. You get Snapcaster as a 5 on the point scale, which honestly is where it belongs because that card's great. I just recently bought one of those for my commander decks, and oh boy,
yeah, that's really cool.
It's been doing so much work.
So, yeah, Travis, he likes to go off about Snappy, but I mean, it's a great card. What can I say? Now, the drawbacks are given a negative value in this equation of -1 or -2, depending on the severity of a drawback. So something like enters the battlefield tapped is a -1. It's not that insane of a drawback, but something that makes you discard a card or sacrifice a creature counts as a -2. That's more of an intense drawback to us.
Right. So, for example, Corvold, the Fey Cursed King, has a +2 for flying, a +5 for the sacrifice clause that draws you cards and makes it bigger, and then a -2 for making you sacrifice a permanent when it ETBs or attacks. So this means that Corvold is valued at a 15 divided by 5, which is the CMC, or a 3. That's a pretty powerful card.
Yeah, and that seems pretty fair for Corvold as well. Now, what we want to stress about this equation is that it is arbitrary. It means nothing except in relation to the other card values, as we said, which means, however, that there is wiggle room in defining the values of abilities. Sometimes the card will obviously come out, so high or so low that you need to reevaluate your rankings until it looks right. We had this problem with Tarmogoyf, actually.
Right. The issue with Tarmogoyf is whether or not you want to include its growth ability as a number or simply create a power level range that it falls in as its power and toughness increase. So if we were to give, his +1/+1 ability per card of a certain kind in graveyards a value of +3, he would be a 2 in the power level rankings. The same power level as Narcomoeba, if you can remember, except Tarmogoyf was considered one of the best cards in Modern, and it costs like $80. So how could it only be as good as a bulk rare Narcomoeba? And this is why we want to take a second look. We decided to value him on a range instead.
Right. So at most, at the very best, Tarmogoyf can have 8 other card types in the graveyard. So an instant, a sorcery, a creature, a land, an enchantment, an artifact, a planeswalker, last but not least, a tribal spell. Yes, tribal spells count. So what this means is this puts Tarmogoyf at a power and toughness of an 8/9 and a card value of 8.5. That's like literally an insane card. However, at the very worst, Goyf is a 0/1 and thus has a card value of 0.5. So your range of value is a 0.5 to an 8.5. That is literally the widest possible range for a card to fall in. What do you think, Travis?
Oh yeah. As the genie would say, still not enough. However, there is one more trick to get this card value in the sweet spot of acceptable. let's talk averages. Now, if you're into numbers, you may be interested to know that the card value of something like Tarmogoyf grows by exactly 1 for each card type added to the graveyard. So if you combine the values of 0.5, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, etc., all the way up to 8.5, then you'll be given the combined power level over the course of that potential growth. Now, all you have to do is divide by the 9 different states that Tarmogoyf could exist in, with one of those card types in the graveyard, 2 of those card types, there's 9 of those different states, or 0 of those card types. Now, this averaged out gives you 4.5. 0.5 less in power level than Snapcaster Mage. Essentially, this is, exactly the number we're looking for.
So, in summary, you might need to explore alternate methods of finding the power level of a complex card like Tarmogoyf. You might have to walk through the complete range of power, as the card can change through a game, and then average that out.
Right. Now, a final point on the components before we step into explaining the other equations for the other card types. Let's discuss dividing by 1 or 0.
For math fiends out there, you might have already spotted the problem, as something like Ornithopter would, according to your formulas, have a value of infinity or undefined if you haven't finished Calculus 4 yet.
Right. This is because of some fancy math. Now, we all know that Ornithopter is not a very good card, and a value of infinity is perhaps the biggest stretch of the imagination since Jake told me that he had a girlfriend back in sophomore year.
Rip. Yeah. Damn, bro, that actually stings.
So, what we need to find is a solution to this CMC issue. The simplest solution is just dividing by 1, or since the card that costs 0 is better than a 1-drop, 0.5 or 0.75. So let's say that for Ornithopter, we've decided that it isn't much better than a 1-drop and should be divided by 1 instead of, 0 for its CMC. That gives us a power level of 4. Still extremely high. Now, what you can do is provide a drawback for creatures that have 0 power, as it is almost exactly like having Defender, which prevents them from attacking, which is a drawback. So Ornithopter has a drawback of, let's say, -1. Now it's a 3 in power level. Better than Narcomoeba, for some reason. Almost as good as Tarmogoyf. It's crazy. However, flying on a creature that essentially can attack is kind of crap. So maybe flying is only worth a +1 on this card instead of a +2. Bam. Now Ornithopter is worth a 2 on the power level scale, right where it should be.
Oh yeah. This is just another example of how you'll need to bend the rules of our imperfect system to get a realistic number.
Speaking of imperfect systems, have you read the Communist Manifesto? Right?
Yeah, let's finally move on to some of these other equations.
All right, next we have instants and sorceries. So the equation is set up a bit like this. You have, +1, +2, +3, +5 for abilities, and then +2 if it's instant speed, if it's an instant, or is a sorcery with flash. I don't know if they have those at all, but... And then you have -X or -1 or -2 for the drawback. Now, all of this is divided by, ready, this is where it gets complicated. It either gets divided by 1 if the CMC is 1, or it gets divided by the CMC of the card times 0.5 or 1/2. So basically, the CMC is divided in half, and then you divide the rest, what's on top, by that.
Now, this equation is clearly a bit different than the first, but much of the ideas remain the same.
Right, so the components, obviously we have the same +1, +2, +3, +5 abilities before. If you can remember those, hopefully you do. You've got simple, things don't come up, things that are okay, things that are really good, things that are really complex. I think you'll find most instants and sorceries, are like +3 to +5 in terms of what they do. Like a board wipe is a +5. That's a really good ability there. And then I would, when looking at a card, if it gives you a card's worth of value, it's either a +2 or a +3. So something like Divination, it draws you 2 cards, so I'd say that's a +3 on there. Or something like Fact or Fiction will get you at least 2 cards usually, so that's like a +3 right there. Maybe even a +4 if you're using gradations.
What would you give something like Faithless Looting? Because it's 1 mana, but it has a pretty relevant ability. Myself, I'd probably give it a 5.
For the looting effect, I would give because there's 2 things on there. You have flashback,
right,
and you have the looting effect. For the looting effect, I'd give it a +2. Since it's, card filtering or, helps you rifle through your deck. But the flashback is also pretty good. I'd probably also give it a +2, maybe I'd probably just give it a +2.
Yeah.
Which puts it at a 4, so that's really good. Maybe the looting is only worth 1.5 since you're actually down a card in value because you draw 2 and then discard 2. So you're sort of down a card. So yeah, I'd give it maybe the looting is at a 1 or a 1.5. And then the flashback, I'd give it probably a 2 or another 1.5. If I gave the looting 1.5, then I'll give the flashback 1.5, putting Faithless Looting at about a 3, which I think is appropriate. It's a really powerful card.
Right, so that's something you guys have to watch out for. I obviously thought Faithless Looting was maybe a little bit better than I gave it credit for. I mean, a little bit better than what, it actually gives us credit for. So, just talking through what you think some cards may be valued is a good idea, especially with a friend. So, yeah. That's a little good side note for you guys.
Advice, yeah. Yeah, and because if you were to look at Faithless Looting, and if you, let's say you gave it like a plus 5 for like the looting and the flashback combined, you're looking at Faithless Looting as a power level of 5. Then you look at Snapcaster, which is also power level 5. And so what'll help you in ranking these cards and getting the right power level is to really, look at what it's compared to and realize, hey, maybe this card is not actually as good as this other one, and tone it back a little bit, which you may be like, Travis, that's basically fudging the numbers. And yeah, that's what you're doing. Yep. Because these are imperfect, and so it's mostly going to rely on your judgment and your consistency to get them to the right numbers, because at the end of the day, they don't have to be exact. They just have to be ballpark, relatively acceptable.
Right, and sometimes it will help you evaluate cards that kind of do the same thing. So, for example, Lightning Bolt is a 1-mana spell that deals 3 damage to target creature or player, or any target these days. And then Lightning Strike is the same effect, but is 1 more mana. So I would give Lightning Strike like a 2, and because of that, I would also give Lightning Bolt about a 3, where originally I might give Lightning Bolt around a 4 or so.
Right. It turns out that Lightning Bolt and Lightning Strike have the exact same power level according to this, which I think makes sense, because really if you're in a cube, the difference is very situational. Like, they do almost the same thing, and the times we're going to find out that Lightning Bolt is actually a better card than Lightning Strike, it's very situational in that instance. In terms of raw power, they're pretty much the same. So now in this equation, you also have the +2 for instant speed. So obviously an instant is far better than a sorcery because you can play it whenever and gives you, more versatility. So you get a +2 bonus for being an instant. That's pretty cool. And then of course you have the minus for the drawbacks, and that's not really anything we have to go into. Drawbacks include things like, let's say legendary sorceries get a -2, maybe even a -3 for drawbacks, because you can only cast those if you have a legendary planeswalker or a creature out. So that's a huge drawback right there. Another thing that, like, let's say that the spell requires you to discard a card, like, what's it called? Like Thrill of Possibility, or it requires you to, like, sacrifice a creature. So, like, Victimize, that's also a drawback. Even though you get 2 cards back, you get, like, definitely a +5 in terms of value bring back. You have to sacrifice a creature, that's maybe a -1, a -2. So things like that for drawbacks.
Yeah, and the last thing we want to touch on here is just, instants and sorceries that have X in their converted mana cost. So, again, this is evaluated with a range, just as we did with Tarmogoyf. So, for example, with Comet Storm, it's obviously a very bad card if you just put 1 mana into the X and the 2 red, but if you put 10 mana into the X and maybe kick it a few times or something like that, that's kind of unrealistic, but you know what I'm trying to say here, guys? Comet Storm, at its very best, could be literally game-busting, but at its very worst, could have little to no effect on the game whatsoever.
Right. No, that's actually a really good point with instant sorceries with X in their converted mana cost. What you want to be doing there is basically, well, actually, let's see, because they're going to get technically, let's see, the effect scales by 1 is that's interesting, because the effect scales by 1, let's say up, you get +1 in terms of value, but then you're also dividing by 1 more. Mm-hmm. Or actually, you're dividing by half a more, so actually, this system works. Guys, the system works. Okay, so basically, as you go up in X, the value of the spell will probably go up by about +1, maybe plus 0.5, depending on what kind of card you're playing. Like Villainous Wealth, as you go up in X, it's definitely worth another +1. However, the CMC, when you divide everything, it's going up by only 0.5. So the spell is getting, 0.5 increments better. So what you want to do with X spells, you can either, look at what they're normally going to be cast as. So if you have Comet Storm, for example, it's usually cast as about a 6-mana spell. You do 3 damage to 2 targets. So you kick it once, 3 in the X, and then the 2 red. And those you just dome 2 things for 6 mana. That's a pretty average use of it. So you could just take, what generally you think it's going to be played as, and then, use that. So, it gets 2 things, and then let's say the kicker ability is probably like a +2 on it, and then the deal definitely. Damage, if it's dealing, 3 damage, then I'd say that's a +2 as well. So you have 4 divided by a CMC of, 6, and it's at instant speed, so that's another +2. So you get Comet Storm at like a 1 in that scenario. which is not that powerful. So maybe the damage is like a +5. I'm not sure. But anyways, you'll be able to figure it out and give it an appropriate number.
Yeah, I think the kicker might actually be a +3 on that card because that's what makes Comet Storm so good and so potent.
Yeah, but, you thought that you could just put the Comet Storm to the same target. Jake would cast a Comet Storm where like X is 5, then kick it like 6 times and just deal me 30 damage. He's like, all right, I'll let you.
Yeah,
and I would just die.
I didn't realize when you kick it, you have to do it to different things. So I would just try and dome someone for like 50 damage and be like, this card's busted.
Oh, yeah. You're trying to pull a slick one on me.
I won a game like that.
No, you won like tons of games like that, Jake. You won like 5 games. I used to have to try to play around Comet Storm when you were playing Lord Windgrace in Commander because I thought you were just going to kick it and just shoot me down. I'd have to have a counterspell at like all times. Like, are you going to Comet Storm me now? Are you going to Comet Storm me? And then we played that Commander game, and then the guy's like, what are you doing? And you're like, all right, I'm going to kill all of you guys. And then he's like, what are you doing? That was a good time.
Yeah, we played with someone who actually noticed what I was doing there.
Who actually knows how to play Magic.
Yeah. So that happens sometimes, but yeah, there's a reason why that card's a mythic.
Oh, yeah. All right, so next let's move on to the equation for artifacts. This one's pretty similar to the other one, almost the same really. You have the abilities, so small, medium, large, extra large, minus the drawbacks. You have no pluses or minus for instant speed here. And then you get, because obviously it's not instant or sorcery, duh. And then you divide it by the CMC multiplied by 0.45. Now this number, because I want to quickly explain the components, you already know about the abilities and their level and the drawback, whatever. Now this 0.45, that comes from putting, the difference between an artifact that is not a creature that has an ability and then a creature that has the same ability as the artifact, and then comparing those two in their relative scores to put them on the same playing field. So something like Ghostly Pilferer has almost the same ability as the same text as Key to the City, except Key to the City, when you're taking the power rankings, doesn't have the benefit of having a power and toughness to add to it. It doesn't have a benefit of a power toughness to boost its number. So Key to the City will be like 0.5 on the scale, and then Ghostly Pilferer will be like a 2.5. And you'd be like, well, hang on, Key to the City is not that much worse than Ghostly Pilferer. It's not 2 points worse than Ghostly Pilferer. And so you got to divide by 0.45 again in order to boost that up just enough to get it, sort of on the same playing field to make up for that power and toughness loss. Now you might be saying, well, Travis, obviously Key to the City is not as good as Ghostly Pilferer because Ghostly Pilferer is Key to the City on a stick. So therefore, it's obviously better. And I agree with you. That's why it's not exactly, you're not exactly making Key to the City's score the same as Ghostly Pilferer because there is a difference there. And so what we did was we just took a bunch of artifacts that had the same abilities as a bunch of creatures and then averaged out, what the sort of the differences were and then used that number. And that's why we have a 0.45, which is sort of a messy number. So trust us, divide by 0.45, and then, just trust me, man.
Yeah, and also the fact that artifacts are usually colorless, so you can play them in any deck, which makes them a little bit better.
That's right, and that gives them some unspoken boosts there too. So yeah, guys, we know what we're talking about. Now, with artifacts and the artifact creatures that are going to be in your cube, use the creature formula, not the artifact one.
Yep, so with non-creature artifacts, this equation is exactly like the first. However, there is a division by 0.45 added.
Right, as we said, and that's it. So let's give you the example of an artifact, Vedalkenori. So Vedalkenori, great staple in Commander. Josh Lee Quiet's favorite card in the world. He hates signing them, though. Don't ask him to, because it's like $20. He doesn't want to just waste that money. He's a good man. This is a tangent. Anyways, with Vedalkenori, all the spells you have gain flash, right? So that ability, I'd say, is like a 4 or 5. That's really complex, adds a lot of complexity and versatility to your cards and to the game.
Right, yeah, that's a +5 to me.
So let's give it a +5. So it's a +5, and then it doesn't have any drawbacks, but it's 4 CMC. So that makes it a 1.5. If we're just, not a 1.5, a 1.25 on our scale. Just because, you divide 5 by 4, that's 1.25.
But we all know that Vedalkenori is literally one of the best artifacts in Commander. So there's no way it could be a 1.5.
Oh yeah, it definitely has to be at least like a 2, and that's why you also divide by 0.45. So 0.45 very close to 0.5. So for the sake of mental math, we're just going to double 1.25, and that gives us 2.5. Vedalkenori at 2.5, I think that's fair.
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
Especially because it doesn't do anything when it enters the battlefield, but it does have a good effect on the game, when you untap and when you get to use it. So I think 2.5 is fair.
Right, and the fact that it doesn't really see play in any other formats besides Commander, that tells us that the mana cost may be too intense for the ability. So that makes sense to us that it's a 2.5.
As long as it ranks higher than Narcomoeba, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with whatever number it gets. All right, so now let's move on to the equation for enchantments. This is literally the exact same thing as artifacts. So if you can picture it in your mind, you have abilities, small, medium, large, extra large added together, minus any drawbacks, divided by the CMC, also divided by 1/3.
Yeah, guys, so as you can see, this is pretty much exactly like the artifacts one. However, the multiplier in the denominator is smaller because enchantments are, let's be real, are worse when compared to equivalent creatures. So to put them on the same relative playing field, as was said before, they need a smaller denominator.
Right, so there's also a lot less general synergy with enchantments than artifacts even, and so that's why you have a multiplier in the denominator of 1/3 instead of 0.45, and it'll just make, enchantments boosted just a little bit higher, make them a little bit of a bigger number to keep them on the same playing field, if that makes sense. If you find that your artifacts it turns out that your enchantments, are getting numbers that are way too high than they deserve, then consider making that multiplier just a bit bigger, maybe bringing it to 2/3, etc., and then you will, you get your number. So let's give an example of a saga because that sort of changes in what it does.
So a good example of a saga is Eldest Reborn. So with the Eldest Reborn, it is 5 mana for an enchantment, which is pretty big, but the abilities are, they're pretty crazy over the 3 turns. So, when you play it for 5 mana on a turn, the first ability triggers when it enters the battlefield, which is, pretty nice that you don't have to wait around for it to do anything. So right away, it will make your opponent sacrifice a creature or planeswalker. What would you give that ability? I think like a +2, +3.
I'd give it a +2, hedging towards like +2.5 again if you're using gradations here. But I'd give it probably a +2 because making them sacrifice is worse than just like destroying it outright.
Exactly.
You're not getting a full card's worth of value on this one since they may sacrifice. It's variable, a little bit situational.
Mm-hmm. And dealing with planeswalkers deserves that little bump too. So I'd maybe give it a 2.5, but it's arguable. And then the next ability on the next turn, so it does have to stick around a whole turn. So that's something you have to be wary of with these sagas.
Yeah, but also they're more resilient to removal than any other permanent in all of Magic, aside from lands.
Yeah, because you're gonna have to sacrifice them anyways. People aren't gonna really want to deal with them.
And also, people don't usually have people have more artifact removal or even land removal, honestly, in this day and age, than they have removal for enchantments. So usually your enchantments are good to stick around for a long while. So
Right.
yeah, it coming around to your turn again to get the second ability, the next ability is not usually something you have to worry about. Usually it's the third ability, honestly, that's more likely.
Yeah,
for it
so
to
the
get
second
removed.
ability just makes each opponent discard a card. So that's like a +1. That's minor.
I don't know. I'd give it a +2 because you think about it. You are getting a card's worth of value, which would give it a +3, except your opponent gets to choose again, like with the sacrifice thing. So you're still getting. I think you're still getting the same level of value as you're getting with the first ability. So if we're giving the first ability a +2.5, I would say the second ability of discarding card is a +2 because your opponent does get to choose, but it's turn 5. They usually won't have that many cards in their hand, and you are getting a card out of their hand.
Right. So generous. We'll give it a +2, maybe 1.5 for being a little more realistic or what have you.
Excuse me? More realistic? You're getting a whole card out of their hand. Like, that's not nothing.
Yeah.
Just because they haven't played it yet doesn't mean it's not good to get rid of it. That's why you discard. That's like Thoughtseize. Like a Thoughtseize, you'd say you're getting a full card's worth of value because you get to choose it. And so you not being able to choose it makes it a bit worse, but not that much worse.
Yeah, but the third ability is really
yeah.
the potent one here.
yeah.
It's I would give it a +3.
I would give it a +5. As we said before in the rankings, +5 is graveyard to battlefield recursion, and so that definitely gets a +5.
Yeah, and you do get to choose this one, and also
it's from any graveyard, and it could be planeswalkers as well.
Oh, very
it's definitely
flexible.
a +5.
Okay, yeah, almost forgot about the planeswalkers thing there. So that pushes it to the top for me.
Yeah, so therefore the rankings, you'll get the first ability, which is a +2, maybe +2.5. Then you get the second ability, which is another +2, and then you have the third ability, which is a +5. And so you have 9 divided by 5. That's 1 4/5, so a 1.8 about, and then you divide that by 1/3. That gives you, like a 2. It gives you like a 4.5 about something like that. 4.5, the same level of Tarmogoyf.
That's pretty insane for Eldest Reborn.
Actually, yeah.
The second ability is like a 1.5.
Yeah. I think you have to either lower the abilities or again lower the or increase the multiplier. I think maybe dividing by 1/3 is a little bit. Maybe divide by 2/3 or divide by a half again. I don't know.
So as you guys can see, you gotta try and mess around with it, especially with certain cards, such as sagas and like that.
So those are difficult to evaluate. Maybe the sacrifice is like a drawback. Who knows?
So we're laying the base for you guys. All you have to do is mess around a little bit, and whatever seems right to you is what you should be aiming for. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. These equations, we came up with them, but they're perfectly, subject to change and are malleable. So as long as you find something that works for you and works for the cards that you want, as long as you keep it consistent across all of your cards, then you're fine, because, it's not like you're having it one way for one card and then another way for another card, and then therefore the numbers no longer mean anything. As long as they are consistent with each other, and therefore the numbers are relevant to each other, then you're fine. So you can feel free to change these up however you see fit.
Right, so these are just guidelines for you guys that we laid down, but they can be extremely helpful when building a cube. So we thought it was extremely important to bring this topic up and spend a whole episode to talk about it with you guys.
Right. With any luck, this system will allow all of your prospective cards that you wish to include in your cubes to be evaluated against each other to make sure that the relative power level between the colors/archetypes and strategies are relatively equivalent. Not exactly equivalent, because you don't really want that, but in the same relative ballpark. Like if you were to go into Vintage Cube and do the power levels of cards, you would find that blue is probably twice as powerful in terms of raw power levels than white is. And that's just how it be, but because you're just playing with the best cards ever. But, if you're playing a cube that's not just trying to play the best card ever printed of a certain kind, then definitely use these so that you can keep things even, so that not everyone just stays away from white, because white sucks.
Hey, don't hate on my good old Thraben Inspector.
All right, and this brings us to the spreadsheet and how we're going to be using these numbers.
So the principal reason for creating these number-based value systems at all, something we probably should have mentioned earlier than now that we're, halfway through, is for balancing purposes.
That's correct. In order to make sure that your colors and archetypes are balanced in terms of power level, you need to compare the sum of these number values to make sure that they are relatively, and I stress the word, relatively equivalent.
It is not possible, nor I think advisable, to have a cube where the power of each color/archetype is exactly equal, plus the work involved to make the whole endeavor not worth it, I think.
But you do want a good ballpark. Thus, we have created a spreadsheet for your use, link in the description, that you can copy and fill with your own cube cards and input their power levels, while our addition formulas that Jake made up himself, what a wonderful man, do the work of adding them all up and spitting out the power level of that entered subset.
This means that your entire cube will be laid out on a single document that gives you a number for each archetype or color to show you whether or not the power level of that respective color/archetype is balanced with the others.
In other words, you're welcome.
So to briefly explain, and I mean briefly, because we'll probably make a short video about how to use the spreadsheet, you just want to input the card name and its value in its respective color or archetype slot, then huzzah! You can change certain effects that are far outside the median with other cards that are more or less powerful to keep the balance.
Because it's all about balance.
Bring balance to the fools.
That was actually pretty close to Alec Guinness's voice. I will give you that. That was actually really good. I'm impressed. So that about wraps up this episode. Let's move on to the Wayne quote of the week, the part that we know you've just been sitting in your chair waiting for and hoping that we would just hurry this thing up and get to it. And let's kick these fools out of our house.
Your Wayne quote of the week is, quote, "I work out in my office. I guess I'm fit for business. Too many visions, completed missions."
Too many visions? Has somebody been casting Snapcaster on Ancestral Recall or Ancestral Vision on Wayne recently? Do you think? Is that why he's too many visions?
Maybe he's been casting too many visions.
And everyone stopped playing in his play group because he always turned one suspends Ancestral Visions.
Yeah, and then you look up and his teeth are just glowing at you.
Have you ever wondered about how Lil Wayne tips people? If somebody like the concierge brings his bags to his room and he just rips out one of his teeth and gives to him, here's 150,000. That's disgusting.
For some reason I knew where you were going with that.
All right, that's the end of the podcast. We're out.
Until next time, Miser Gang.
Peace.